This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China is calling for a bigger voice for the Global South. In a new white paper, Beijing says that the international system must reflect today's world, with Foreign Minister Wang Yi calling for equal representation. The G7 is moving to cut its reliance on China's critical minerals. France pushing for a joint declaration to strengthen supply chains and counter economic pressure. New measures to internationalize the yuan rolled out by Chinese policymakers at a finance forum in Shanghai. And the Bank of Korea says consumer prices could stay higher for longer, with pressures linked to war on Iran likely to spread. The central bank also cautions that AI-related bonus windfalls may stoke inflation. Also tonight, a major shakeup along the Korean border. Seoul announces one of the biggest changes to security rules in decades, cutting back a civilian buffer zone near the north in response to long-standing requests from residents. And pampered pooches tackle obstacle courses, enjoy gourmet treats, and drift off to classical music. It's all part of a growing industry in China, set to hit nearly $60 billion in 2 years, as Chinese pet owners spare no expense on their beloved fur kids. China has released a new white paper on global governance as it warns that the international system is at a critical crossroads. The document calls for a greater voice for global South countries while reaffirming the central role of international institutions like the United Nations. CNA's Tan Su-hui with this report.
A rare news conference led by China's top diplomat Wang Yi, flanked by senior officials from the country's state planner and ruling Communist Party. A display of cross-agency coordination as Beijing unveiled a new white paper setting out its vision for reforming global governance.
全球治理面临逆水行舟，不进则退。面对世界进入新的动荡变革期，我们比任何时候都更需要重振多边主义，更需要坚守规则法治，更需要提升治理效能。
The document doubles down on details from last year's concept paper on China's global governance initiative, presenting what Beijing says is its solution to building a more just and equitable international system.
The nearly 50-page long white paper is as notable for what it emphasizes as what it leaves unsaid. While it references major global flashpoints like the Ukraine war as well as the hostilities in the Middle East, much of its criticisms were framed in broad terms rather than directed at specific countries.
The document contains several veiled swipes at the U.S. It refers to some countries that have instigated trade and tech wars, and a certain major power that has withdrawn from international organizations. Instead, it advocates a UN-centered and multipolar system of global governance.
丛林法则之所以卷土重来，不是由于联合国的宪章过时了，而恰恰是因为宪章 没有得到有效的遵守和维护。面对层出不穷的全球挑战，当务之急就是要履行联合国宪章的义务，奉行主权平等，遵守国际法治，反对强权霸凌。
The white paper also calls on countries to de-escalate flashpoints, Mr. Wang making brief mention of tensions in the Middle East.
当务之急是各方 相向而行，坚定落实停火止战，为构建可持续的中东地区安全架构来奠定基础。
A call was also made for more global South voices to be heard, Mr. Wang advocating for reform of institutions like the IMF and World Bank to increase representation of developing countries in international affairs. While not stated explicitly, observers said this reflects China's ambition to play a leadership role among developing nations.
中方认为，全球南方群体性的崛起不可阻挡， 少数国家垄断国际事务的时代已经一去不返。
The white paper also lays out how China intends to tackle challenges in new frontiers like artificial intelligence and space. Beijing saying it will continue to further international cooperation to ensure technology remains safe, inclusive, and beneficial for all. Tan Zihui, CNA, Beijing.
Now, to unpack what this report means, we are joined now by Wang Huiyao, founder of the Center for China and Globalization and former counselor to China's State Council. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, Dr. Wang. Let's talk about first the timing of this report, coming at a time as the G7 is happening, and also we're seeing significant developments in the Middle East. What do you think Beijing is trying to signal here by releasing this report now?
Yes. As the program just said, we are at the crossroads of the global geopolitical and all the things happening. And as you said, G7 just finished now, and also this Friday we're going to have this new MOU to be signed between the U.S. and Iran on the Iranian issue, which is just a beginning of this settlement. But also, we're going to have the UN actually going to elect a new Secretary General by the end of this year. We're going to have an APEC summit coming up in China, G20 summit coming up in Miami, in US. So there's a lot of global governance issues on the table, in the next few months. So I think at this time, China has really, systematically and going all the way out to put forward this global governance initiative. White paper is really timely and demonstrates China's position and China's call for a more inclusive, constructive, and more forward-looking reform of global governance. I think, being a big country like China to really take initiative, calling for actions and calling for a new narrative on this global governance is really important and very timely. And Minister Wang Yi attend this news briefing is also shows the importance that China attaches to this great issue of global affairs.
Yeah, perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more on that, because Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he was played a visible role around the release of this report. What does that tell us in terms of where global governance now sits within China's foreign policy priorities and agenda?
I think from what this news conference that we can see, this is highly prioritized. And you see not only Minister Wang Yi attended, Vice Minister Miao Deyu also attended, Vice Minister Jin from Liaison Party Department also attended, also NDRC. So you have a lot of people, also China's Development Aid Agency head is also there. So it's quite comprehensive, but basically, China has proposed in the last number of years of a global development initiative, global security initiative, and global civilization initiative, and global governance initiative as the last one. But it's all it's consistent and also overall it covers all the areas. So I think, for example, Minister Wang Yi mentioned at the news conference, which I was listening as well, that he was saying China now is the second largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping budget, and the largest peace troops sending country among the P5. And China has done that for many countries and has accumulated a big, tangible, also standby peacekeeping troops on that. So given the turmoil we're having in this world, I think China is readily available to, really reinforce UN to do the peacekeeping, if it's needed in Ukraine or needed in the Middle East. I think China wants to sure that they are active players. But not only that, but China wants calling for a greater reflection of global south, as that has been mentioned as well, that not only are those financial, World Bank, IMF, but also Minister Wang talk about UN, even Security Council, we need to have more global south voices. So those are, I think, the concrete suggestions there that wants to really inject into this global governance reform and initiative. And furthermore, I think this is the time that China has been putting forward this global governance initiative has already got 160 countries interested into this, and 60 countries has signed into the club of a friend circle of this global governance discussion club as well. So I think it's getting momentum and getting a lot of interest And also, certainly, China is going to lead this global South voice to this global governance reform. And I'm sure this also, given what happened, going to be there's another few summits between China and the U.S. We're going to have an APEC, we have a G20, and also timing now is also in between G7 meeting and also a new memorandum to be signed between Iran and U.S. So China's voice put forward this time is very timely, and it also demonstrates China's determination and strong will to help.
So, Dr.
to
Wang,
avoid the world going to that North jungle.
I just want to highlight here what might say, the message between the lines here, if you could just read for us, because it doesn't explicitly name the U.S., but obviously there are references to tariffs and unilateral measures and about countries stepping back from international institutions. How should we interpret that message there?
Yeah, I think that's what at the beginning of this white paper already said. The world has gone through the turmoil. We're in a turbulent world. We are really having crisis. We have a war going on in Iran, in Ukraine, and many other countries. And also the world never seen a chaotic situation like this, and the global governance is falling. And of course, we are embracing a multipolar world now, but a multilateral system for this multi-world is not getting there. And that's why China re-emphasized the importance of UN and how to really strengthen that, and particularly singled out a lot of jungle, and unilateralism is not going to work. And I think also, we need to also avoid this Kinderberger trap that maybe one existing power that's getting out of all the global government, global public goods providing, and China actually stepped in to provide a many vacuum that has been left there. Like China just donated 500 million to the WHO when US is pulling out of that. So I think, the message is clear that we need to avoid the vacuum of global governance, and also all the countries, including the global South, which is rising economically and politically, should also take more part into this global governance system. So of course, even though China didn't mention US, but some of the unilateral behavior of US is implicated there is also obvious. So I think China, of course, still wants to work with all the countries, all the stakeholders, particularly global South. Let's put forward a more equitable global system that every country is looking forward. And I think that China demonstrates timely its leadership and its new direction forward-looking on this global governance issue.
Well, thanks, Dr. Wang, for joining us all the way from Belgrade, Serbia. Wang Huiyao there, founder of the Center for China and Globalization and also former counselor to China's State Council. Critical minerals at the forefront on the final day of the G7 summit. Host France is pushing G7 partners to support a joint statement on the industry in a bid to help reduce dependence on China, all part of the broader theme at the gathering to address global economic imbalances, strengthen trade, and ensure fair competition. Now, leaders are also set to discuss the future of artificial intelligence at a working lunch with CEOs Sam Altman of OpenAI and Anthropic's Dario Amodei, among several of the other AI chiefs. G7 leaders earlier welcomed the US-Iran deal, agreeing to support its implementation. Months of conflict had rattled global energy markets and cast a long shadow over the summit. Now, the group also has its sights on Russia's war against Ukraine, pledging to apply greater pressure on Moscow's war economy. Now we've got Ross Cullen for CNA joining us live from Evian in France. Ross, first up, let's talk about host France, who has tied critical minerals to economic sovereignty. So what can we expect from today's efforts to basically diversify the supply chain?
Well, this is a subject, Telly, which has been spoken about by France regularly, not just here at the G7 in the summit location of Evian, but in other forums as well. How to reduce a reliance on China, how to deal with trade imbalances and other commercial inequalities, such as what the Europeans believe is the flooding by China of this market with its goods. And they also believe there is not reciprocal access into China for European firms. So they want to be able to reduce their reliance there because they have had vulnerabilities exposed, China's export curbs in 2025. And also another vulnerability they have recognized is the Strait of Hormuz. They're looking at other diversified energy supply routes because they've realized that choke point can be closed off at a moment's notice. And we've seen the impact over the last couple of months of that waterway being closed. So overall, when it comes to critical minerals and other issues like the Strait of Hormuz, the Europeans here at the final day of the G7 summit are looking for diversification, diversify their supply chains, diversify what they're providing to Ukraine in terms of aid, and diversify where they do get their supplies of critical minerals.
And Ross, separately, China has stressed today that it plans to share AI globally and safely. How do you think this is going to figure into today's talks on artificial intelligence?
Well, I tell you, that's one of the most fast-moving sectors we have in the world at the moment. Just look at the recent initial public offering by SpaceX. XAI is part of Elon Musk's company. Huge interest there, talking in terms of hundreds of billions of dollars in this sector. And we have some of the top tech chief executives here as well, including Sam Altman from OpenAI. We have Arthur Mersch from Mistral, which is one of the biggest French AI firms, and Dario Amodei from Anthropic as well. We know there has been controversy regarding Anthropic and their relationship with the Pentagon particularly. So it'll be interesting to see there the conversations between Anthropic and the US President Donald Trump, who is still here taking part in those discussions. But they are looking to try to design a way of having a safer AI environment, making sure the deployment of artificial intelligence is equitable, and also more generally they're looking at trying to agree or communicate on the protection of children online, all parts of the digital part of these discussions taking place here at the G7. Ateli.
Thanks so very much for that. Ross Cullen for CNA on the G7 summit in Evian, France. Well, still we've got business news ahead on East Asia tonight. Japan's exports surged in May, but a weak yen pushed up import costs, offsetting those gains. Plus, South Korea and OpenAI agreed to work together to establish a global security framework for AI. Hello again, you're watching East Asia tonight, and it is now time for business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, Bank of Korea, apparently they are signaling inflation risks ahead. Tell us what's driving this outlook.
Yeah, the BOK is mainly worried about secondary effects. Even if the Middle East shock fades, well, the earlier jump in energy and forex costs may be already fed into the broader prices. Now, South Korea's central bank has flagged that inflation could stay higher for longer. Bank of Korea made the assessment in a semi-annual report. Consumer prices in the month of May spiked 3.1% on year. That's to its highest since 2024. The BOK is expecting the consumer price index to remain around that 3% level in the second half of the year, while core inflation likely to trend around the mid-2% range. That's above the central bank's target. The Monetary Authority said the energy prices are likely to decline as the situation between the US and Iran eases. But its inflationary impact, well, that will spread across a wider range of goods. The effects of a weaker Korean won also likely to be felt across the economy. The BOK cautioned as well that AI-driven company bonuses could complicate the inflation outlook. Now, it notes that higher pay at leading firms could force others to raise wages to keep workers. Stronger spending power from tech workers also has the potential to lift demand for goods and services, pushing prices up. Bank of Korea said it has not seen such effects in the economy yet, but highlights that it is worth monitoring. Japan's trade balance swung back into deficit in the month of May for the first time in 4 months as a weak yen pushed up the cost of imports. The finance ministry reported a trade deficit of nearly $2.4 billion US dollars. The value of imports rose 12.5% from a year earlier, while exports climbed 17%, boosted by strong demand for chips and automobiles. Analysts say the trade deficit could persist as higher import costs offset gains from exports, potentially weighing on economic growth in the months ahead. Now, this a day after the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to their highest since 1995 in an effort to contain inflation. Other business news on our radar. Now, prices of petrol cars in China slumping after high oil prices linked to the war on Iran dented demand. Local media reports found that some Range Rover models going for almost 60% less than their recommended retail price. Discounts for petrol-powered cars also averaging about 25% in the 3 months ended May. Now, that's more than twice that of hybrid or electric vehicles. The price slump is adding pressure on legacy automakers as Beijing is cracking down on a long-running price war. South Korea has established a security partnership with OpenAI, the fourth country to forge such an alliance with the ChatGPT developer. South Korea's AI Safety Institute will be working with OpenAI to develop a global framework for assessing security risks. The system will also be tailored to the Korean language and the country's social context. OpenAI has similar partnerships with security labs in the US, the UK, and Japan. The US is reportedly holding off on blacklisting Chinese AI firms, including DeepSeek, and more than 100 others flagged as security risks. According to Reuters, memory chipmaker CXMT was among those approved for inclusion on the entity list last year, but has yet to be officially added. Now, the entity list restricts companies from buying US goods, software, and tech without special approval. The delay comes as Washington seeks to avoid escalating tensions with Beijing amid disputes over trade, technology, and national security. DeepSeek has faced growing scrutiny in the US. Reuters previously reported allegations that the company supported Chinese military and intelligence activities. Washington has also flagged that DeepSeek had sought access to advanced US chips through intermediary companies. Now, China has denied those claims. The US has not added any new firms to the entity list since October. That's marking the longest pause in more than a decade. Now, critics warn that the delay could allow more American tech to reach companies that Washington considers security risks. Now, SpaceX has maintained its blistering surge since going public last week. Shares rose as much as 17% before falling back, ending almost 5% in the green. Now, with its gains, SpaceX has surpassed Amazon's market value to become the fifth most valuable US company. The firm had at one point briefly topped Microsoft as well. But can Mr. Musk's trillion-dollar firm live up to its lofty valuations? Well, Richard Rail from Questar Capital Partners explains.
This stock has generated the most excitement I've seen since baby Facebook going public, 14 years ago. So there's a lot of excitement behind that name. We expect that name to go higher in the short run. SpaceX is unique. I mean, they are a very unique company. I mean, there's so many believers in Elon Musk and just all the great things that they're doing. Because as you know, they've rolled it's not just SpaceX. They've got XAI, they've got X itself in there, and there's talk about them even rolling Tesla and all the Optimus robots in there, where I think there's still a lot of concern about AI and the competition. We're seeing already price competition between Anthropic and OpenAI coming in. And I think that's got people concerned, and that may play into those valuations not being quite they're not being quite the same level of excitement as there is with SpaceX.
And I'll have more business news for you after the break. China makes a new push to take the yuan global as the world's second biggest economy shifts its growth engine to tech and innovation. An analyst joins us to break down Beijing's latest measures and whether it can capitalize on de-dollarization. Stay tuned.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China calls for more voices of the Global South to be heard at the United Nations, warning that current representation is no longer adequate. The G7 moves to cut its reliance on China's critical minerals on the last day of a summit in Evian. Host France pushing for a joint declaration to strengthen supply chains and counter economic pressure. Plus, the Bank of Korea warns that consumer prices could stay higher for longer, with pressures linked to the Middle East conflict likely to spread. And for more on the business front, Roland Lim is back. Now, Roland, we know that a major finance forum is underway in Shanghai. Walk us through some of the key takeaways.
Thanks, Natalie. Yes, China has announced fresh measures to push the global use of the yuan and to better manage domestic money market liquidity. The country's top finance leaders are in Shanghai for an annual forum and warn against systemic financial risks. Our senior correspondent, Tan Yuan, reports.
Lu Jiazui is one of China's top financial policy forums, starring speakers from China's central bank, financial regulators, as well as Shanghai's top officials. But this year, Vice Premier He Lifeng makes a rare appearance, the first central government vice premier to speak in person at the event in 7 years. His presence immediately lifts the tone of the event from sector-level policy discussions to broader national economic signaling. And the message is consistent. China wants to push financial opening and support companies going global, but within a tightly managed framework. The Vice Premier says the government will help improve cross-border trade and investment in Shanghai, a significant move in a country where cross-border money flows are restricted.
在上海开展更加灵活的贸易外汇结算试点，以及跨境再保险收入境外投资便利化试点，将跨国公司跨境资金集中运营管理试点推广至上海，便利跨国公司跨境资金统筹使用。
The Vice Premier also vows to tackle local government debt and said another 300 billion yuan in special bonds will be issued to replenish the capital of financial institutions. China's central bank governor also took to the podium, announcing a series of measures, including a tool to enable overseas central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and international financial organizations to obtain yuan liquidity more easily.
我们还将丰富离岸人民币债转、衍生品供给，支持香港建设全球离岸人民币业务枢纽，在境外形成有深度和活跃度的离岸人民币市场。我们将加强开放条件下的金融稳定保障体系和能力建设，守住不发生系统性风险的底线。
Observers see China's gradual steps to internationalize the yuan as a bid to reduce its dependence on a global payment system dominated by the US dollar. On China's slowing loan growth, the central bank leader said it's difficult and unnecessary for China's credit growth to maintain its previous pace. Tan Yuan, CNA, Shanghai.
And for more insights, we're joined by Guo Shan, who is partner at Hutong Research, and she's speaking to us live from Shanghai. Guo Shan, thank you for joining us on the show. I want to start off by asking about Beijing's further push towards yuan internationalization. Why now? And how does the digital yuan actually fit into cross-border payments?
Thanks for these two most important questions. Indeed, why now? I think that's the question that most of our audience are questioning. And it is mostly because China is now having its companies expanding overseas. And we think that this is a rather strategic long-term plan, and Beijing is trying to facilitate providing the necessary financial services for these companies to expand overseas. Actually, I think the pursuit of this global expansion started last year at the fourth plenum of China's 15th five-year plan, when the top leaders said that China is going to facilitate its international expansion. So we see this push for renminbi internationalization as part of the greater push. So China is now going global rather than just staying at home. And when you mentioned the digital currency, I think that's another track that China is also piloting, because when we think about the digital renminbi, it's another way of digital currencies. One common way that is already functioning in the world is a stable coin, which is linked to the US dollar. But China's way is trying to pursue its own renminbi e-currency, so that this is a more controlled mechanism, and for China to build its infrastructure partners across other countries. So that's another way like China is trying to push renminbi internationalization in this digital world.
So the other big question we hope you would answer is the yuan. Do you think it can become more global while these capital controls remain in place?
Yes, we tend to think about yuan internationalization as a very long-term thing, because there are a number of different issues why people do not want to hold yuan as much as dollar. For example, if you hold yuan, what are the things you can use Chinese currency to buy? And the second would be, if you hold yuan, what are the risks that could be associated with the currency, and what are the things that you can use to hedge the risk you are exposed to? So when we think about dollar, you can use yuan to purchase U.S. Treasury, U.S. stock market, and there is a lot of liquidity tools for you to manage your dollar assets. But in China, all of these are underdeveloped. So I think before we talk about capital opening, there are a lot more that China can do to facilitate its renminbi internationalization. For example, to create more assets for foreign investors to buy in China, and also to offer more liquidity tools for them to manage any risk that could come from holding the renminbi assets.
And what does that mean? Because China's major traders have been asking for more RMB products. So what does this mean for Hong Kong, Shanghai, and even Singapore as financial centers, as well as offshore renminbi centers?
Yes, I think several things are going on at the same time, starting from Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is the most mature offshore renminbi market. I think two most important things are happening right now. One is that the central bank is allowing other central banks to buy renminbi assets as well as to buy the bond futures. Basically, that's one way to hedge whatever the renminbi assets the other central banks are holding. So this is very critical as the liquidity management tool and to hedge risk against the renminbi assets. And the other thing is that the financial regulators also mentioned that they are going to expand the QD program, which is a qualified domestic investor program that there are certain quotas for domestic capital to invest in Hong Kong. So that will also gradually expand to allow more two-way capital flows between Hong Kong and China. And the other way, I think, is a little bit surprise to a lot of the observers is the role of Shanghai. So before, it was mostly Hong Kong that is managing the offshore renminbi. But now Shanghai is also given this international financial status and more a palette to experiment offshore renminbi trading. I think 6 banks were identified as the pilots to do this kind of trading. We are still waiting for more details, but we think that this is going to materialize in a fairly soon pace. And for Shanghai to do this, it will play a different role compared with Hong Kong. Because when we think about Hong Kong is more about like a financial market. But Shanghai is a place where a lot of trade is still happening. And when the top leaders, they discuss Shanghai, it's more about insurance, it's more about a treasury function, currency management. And I think Shanghai will play a bigger role to facilitate Chinese companies to go overseas, while Hong Kong will be a hub for international investors to buy Chinese assets. So these are the division of labor between Hong Kong and Shanghai. And for other financial centers, such as Singapore, I think it become a new partner in China, the Shanghai and Hong Kong. So for Singapore, when you deal with the Shanghai and Hong Kong, you think there are different ways to partner with these Chinese financial institutions and to facilitate the Chinese companies to go overseas. And Singapore, as a traditional, very strong financial hub, definitely has a role to play to facilitate the Chinese companies, not just coming out of China, but also reaching other financial markets and other markets, including ASEAN and other more developed markets.
So also, Guoshan, the foreign talks a lot about funding technology through its full life cycle. Do you think China is trying to build its own version of Silicon Valley finance?
I think we are very far from there yet. I think China is to some extent trying to address its past problems because when we look at China's funding structure, it's very much dominated by banks right now. When we look at the share of China's direct financing, which is bond and equity as the share of total financing, I think it's roughly 15% right now. In the US, you would expect the ratio to exceed 50%. And we're talking about 15%, and the ratio was very low, 10% last year. So it means that Chinese leaders are trying to make the financial system more efficient, trying to find the more experienced funding investors to identify the most efficient and innovative firms in China. I think it will still take a very, very long way for China to catch up with the liquidity and the financial system as in Silicon Valley.
Well, some great insights there. Thanks so very much for your time and thoughts, Guoshan, partner at Hutong Research, and also big thanks to Roland Lin. Right, going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, South Korea is reducing the size of a civilian buffer zone near the DMZ with the North. We'll tell you why. More now from the G7 summit, where South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has asked his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump to lead peaceful diplomacy with North Korea. According to South Korea's presidential office, the U.S. leader asked Mr. Lee in a brief exchange about the current state of inter-Korean relations. Well, the South Korean president urged Mr. Trump to play a leading role in achieving a peaceful resolution with Pyongyang, just as he had done with the conflict in the Middle East. Seoul says that Mr. Trump expressed his commitment to working toward a resolution of the North Korean issue. Now, the U.S. president held 3 summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his first term. Meanwhile, the South Korean president also held talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He says they agreed to advance bilateral ties to a new level, strengthening cooperation across all areas, including the economy, culture, and society. Mr. Modi echoing those remarks, saying that New Delhi and Seoul are working together in trade, commerce, and other futuristic sectors. Well, the G7 summit has been dominated by discussions of the emerging US-Iran deal, with leaders welcoming what they see as a possible pathway to ending the Middle East conflict. G7 countries backed efforts to turn the interim agreement into a lasting settlement. They also called for a ceasefire in Lebanon and pledged to diversify energy supply routes to reduce reliance on the Strait of Hormuz. Details of the US-Iran deal are slowly beginning to emerge. Washington and Tehran are expected to formally sign a memorandum of understanding in Switzerland this Friday. The deal would extend the current ceasefire by another 60 days. It would also reopen maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, while allowing Iran to resume oil exports as the U.S. lifts its blockade. Now, that prospect is already shaping expectations in energy markets. The International Energy Agency says Gulf oil production and exports should gradually recover if the deal holds, helped by the return of Iranian crude to global markets. The agency also forecasts a significant oil surplus next year, with supply expected to grow faster than demand. Some signs of a gradual recovery are already visible. Shipping data shows at least 3 Iranian oil tankers have passed through the U.S. naval blockade this week. And we've got more coverage of the US-Iran deal on our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app. South Korea has announced one of its biggest changes to border security rules since the Korean War, redrawing a line that has restricted civilian life along its frontier with North Korea for more than 70 years. Well, the government says advances in surveillance technology are easing the need to maintain the buffer zone at its current size. CNA's senior correspondent, Lim Yun-suk, with this report.
The border between South and North Korea is one of the most heavily fortified in the world. Since the Korean War, South Korea has maintained a civilian buffer zone there where access and development are limited. But this area will be reduced, easing decades-long restrictions on communities near the border.
과거의 군사시설 규제는 당시의 환경에는 적합했으나 오늘날 현실은 새로운 방식을 요구하고 있습니다. 변화된 안보 환경에 대응하고 군이 본연의 임무 태세에 집중할 수 있도록 여건을 보장하기 위해서는 군사시설 규제 개선이 필연적으로 필요하게 되어 있습니다.
The military demarcation line shows the land border between the two Koreas. Currently, the civilian control line sits up to 10 kilometers south of it. With the change, it will be reduced to an average of 6 kilometers. Military installations like these concrete anti-tank barriers will begin coming down next year. From 2027, farmers authorized to access the area will also be able to gain access to border areas through a mobile app without going through military checkpoints.
국방부는 이번 군사시설 규제 계획 정책이 안보를 튼튼히 하고 국민 편익을 제거할 수 있도록 제반 조치를 신속하고 체계적으로 추진해 나가도록 하겠습니다. 앞으로도 국방부는 안보 환경 변화에 따라서 적극적으로 대응하는 한편 안보와 국민 편익이 조화를 이룰 수 있도록 최선을 다하겠습니다.
South Korea is not moving the border itself, but the rules governing the area are changing significantly. The move comes as President Lee Jae-myung pursues measures aimed at reducing tensions along the border, including suspending loudspeaker broadcasts towards the north. Seoul says advances in surveillance technology such as drones and sensors mean the decades-old border restrictions are no longer necessary. But critics say that while the technology may have changed, North Korea remains a threat. Im Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, time now for some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. The Korea Herald reports that top memory chip maker SK Hynix has removed academic requirements in a new round of hiring, instead of judging applicants on job skills and growth potential, as the company seeks to widen its talent pool amid surging demand for AI-related hardware. Asahi News says the chief of a tour boat firm operating in Hokkaido has been sentenced to 5 years jail for professional negligence over the sinking of a vessel in 2022 during stormy weather that left 26 people dead or missing. The South China Morning Post reports that Chinese fast fashion heavyweight Shein will be ousted from a major department store in Paris after other brands pulled out to protest its presence. Critics cited concerns over the impact of the Chinese e-commerce giant on France's fashion industry. From treadmills and snack breaks to piano-accompanied naps, some pets in China are now heading to preschools. Now, demand for daycare and training centers is booming as owners invest more and more in their pets.
In this Shanghai preschool, teacher's pet takes on a new meaning. The animals arrive by 9 a.m. each day at Paw Cubed, a self-described kindergarten for dogs, which provides full care for its puppy pupils. On the Pooch's daily schedule, there's a routine of interactive games and obstacle courses with snack times in between. Pets can even stroll on a special dog treadmill and enjoy a nap as a pianist plays classical music, all before their owners pick them up at around 7 p.m. Paw Cube founder Jan Zhang said the concept of doggy preschool came to him after struggling to find help for a pet who had developed anxiety-related behavioral problems, which he linked to a lack of socialization. But Zhang did not expect his idea would grow to the scale it has today.
我没有想过会有那么多的人，那么多的家长会来，也没想过有那么多老师。但可能慢慢的到了第3个月的时候，有一波志同道合的小伙伴就加入我们了。然后那个时候，我们的狗狗已经从10几只到了30-40只。
At Paw Cubed, owners pay daily sums ranging up to about $20 depending on the size of the dog. China-based industry research firm Pet Data estimated the country's total spending on urban pet care hit around $46 billion in 2025 and could approach $60 billion by 2028. Broader structural shifts in China's consumer economy have driven profitability in the pet market, as younger urban consumers prioritize spending on experiences and emotional fulfillment. Declining birth rates have also altered lifestyles, with pets increasingly treated as members of the family, leading owners to invest in higher value services like daycare, grooming, and training. Dog owner William Tang shares a paw parent's perspective.
我觉得最重要是它可以有一个怎么说，有一个可以有一个狗狗自己专属的一个学校，或者说一个场所，它不需要人去陪它，它可以去在这边充分的去社交，去过它自己的狗生。这个我觉得是最吸引我的一个地方，因为我觉得我的观念就是，我其实一直把小新当做我自己孩子去养的。我觉得他小新的可能一生狗生可能很短，它不像人，它可能只有10年、10几年或者更少。那我就希望它可以在有限的狗生里面去过出它自己精彩的人生。
And that wraps up this Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can find us on our socials, Facebook and YouTube included. For our Singapore audience, do stay on for highlights from the FIFA World Cup matches.